Hello, everybody. Welcome to our coffee with spiritual directors. I got my coffee. Do you have yours, Jen?
I drank it already.
No,
I was
I
impatient.
know. It's already 12:30 in the afternoon, so I don't know if we should be drinking it. Do I call you Jen or Jennifer?
I usually go by Jen
Jen? Okay,
for
Jen
the, yeah.
Late. We actually never met, so I was trying to figure out how we got connected because I remember signing up for your newsletter. Uh,
Huh.
and I was very much like intrigued by something that you said. I can't remember. For the life of me, I couldn't remember where I met you. But I do remember visiting your site and signing up for your newsletter. So I get your newsletter whenever
Great.
yeah, send it out. So, just for the sake of our audience, kind of getting to know you, and because I'm also, meeting you for the first time on Zoom, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
So I'm Jen. I live in Massachusetts and I'm a spiritual director. I also am a board certified chaplain and an ordained pastor with the American Baptist Churches of Massachusetts. I founded a spiritual formation ministry in 2015, and it's been kind of a side project part time for the past 10 years. And then in October, I incorporated it as a nonprofit, and I'm still figuring out what that means. But it turns out it makes it a lot different than I thought.
Yeah, I think one of the newsletters that I read, you mentioned that you're starting a Doctor of Ministry
Oh,
degree.
yeah,
Is that
that
right?
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that a little bit.
Okay, so that I kind of became aware of this program randomly, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and it's at my alma mater from undergrad, and I had been feeling kind of nostalgic about that place for some reason,
Hmm.
and found out about this program, and I hadn't really thought that I wanted more schooling. I have a master's, and like I said, I have these certifications, so I didn't really think I need to do something more, but I had thought, well, I might consider a doctorate in spiritual formation if I could find a program that I wanted.
Hmm.
And then I found out about this one. So I applied. I think what I'm hoping to do with it is in the ministry that I started, a lot of the people that I work with have gone through some version of deconstruction.
Yeah.
And now some of them are saying, we're good with Jesus now. We feel much more secure in our faith. We want to get connected with churches again, but we can't find any place that it's not even about agreeing with theology. It's they're looking for places that have some kind of understanding of where they've been. And I really feel like maybe the next phase of my ministry is to partner more with churches intentionally and help train them either in trauma awareness or just maybe just deconstruction, reconstruction awareness.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm hoping that whatever I'm not really great at narrowing down like big ideas into one single question. So I haven't figured out what my research question is yet, but I want to do something around that, helping reconcile churches with people who left in a way that is honoring to both parties and healing.
So are you working as a pastor of a church at the same time right now? As a
No, I was I stepped down in August to
Mhm.
intentionally to focus more fully on the pilgrimage ministry.
Yeah.
So
That includes spiritual direction, correct?
yes. Mhm.
Yes, yes. I found a perfect person to ask, so that this is great. I'll get into that in a bit, but could you tell us a little bit about how you come across spiritual direction? When was your first encounter to spiritual direction, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So can I tell you about my first and second encounters? Because they were very
Sure.
different from each other.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
So in my 20s, my mid 20s, after I graduated from college and I worked as a nanny for 2 years to pay off my loans, I went on the mission field to work with refugees in the UK. And the leaders of the team that I joined there, the original leaders, they were husband and wife, and they were both training to be spiritual directors. So I got to London and instantly was kind of like, along with the other teammates, kind of a guinea pig for them to try to practice spiritual direction and also teach us other contemplative practices like Lectio Divina and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I loved it because I am a naturally imaginative person. And so Lectio Divina and imaginative Bible reading really grabbed onto me. I don't think I was really ready for spiritual direction per se, but I loved this couple. Still love them. They're great. But even if I wasn't fully sure what spiritual direction specifically was, I had
Hmm.
really good role models talking about it.
Yeah.
So my awareness was there right away. So then the year that I turned 30, I ended up feeling like I was called back to the United States. Didn't really want to be, kind of went through definitely a time of wrestling with God and maybe a little bit of dark night of the soul kind of thing.
Yeah.
And while I was I moved a bunch and started a master's degree in counseling. And then that and the location and the school were all a bad fit for me as I was at that time. So while I was trying to process all this, I thought, I wonder if spiritual direction would help. And so there was somebody at the church I was going to whose wife was a spiritual director. And so I went to her for one session, and the first thing she said to me was, "You're a little young for spiritual direction."
Oh,
And I
you're
was
right.
like, okay. Never heard of that before. Don't know what that means. Like, and then she proceeded to,
What does she mean by what? Does that mean that you are normally young people don't come and get the spiritual direction, or for you to become a spiritual director, too young to be?
no, I think she was talking about me as a directee. I was too young to be a directee. And I think
Oh,
probably
wow.
what she meant was I didn't have enough life experience, maybe. But it was a little off-putting.
Yeah, I would
Also
think so
because
too.
I was, I mean, right now 30 seems very young, but but at the time, I mean, I was like, I'm 30 and all of the things that a 30-year-old might expect to have happened in their life by now haven't happened yet. And so I feel old. Like I feel like everything has bypassed me and now I'm too old for those things. And so yeah, it was not a good season
Hmm.
for me to have that kind of reception from a spiritual director. So at that point, I was like, forget this. This is weird. This isn't what I
Mm.
thought. So I forgot about it for a long time until my next season of this time I wasn't wrestling with God. God and I were good, but I had a situation with a church that was difficult and I had to leave. And at that point, I was older and I had more life experience and I was like, and I had just graduated from seminary, and so I was like, maybe I want to get into this. So I found a director myself. He was very good, and then I started training to be a director too.
I see. So what specifically what shifted for you to want to be from being a spiritual directee to a spiritual director?
So I've always been the person that friends come to unburden themselves.
Hmm.
And so I think that's why, when I came back to the States from London, my first thought was, oh, I'm going to get a degree in counseling because I can listen to people. People tell me stuff all the time anyway.
Yeah.
I want to help. But taking the counseling courses, I was like, this isn't quite, I could see the value in it, but I didn't feel like it was quite what I wanted to do. And so when I finally finished seminary, I had a very formative spiritual formation class.
Hmm.
And I was like, I feel like I could teach this. And this is the kind of thing this is where I feel like I could probably do something that aligns with my skill set. And so I did a little research and I actually wanted to become a spiritual director before I got a spiritual director, but I was like, I probably should have one
Mm.
um, to make sure I know what I'm getting into, and just because it's probably good practice to
Yeah.
have one. So yeah, so I don't have the same one now, but I do have one, and she is excellent.
So becoming a spiritual director, if you are called back into being a pastor, would you still remain as spiritual director, or would you kind of go back to church and being a pastor, or would you bring this with you into pastoral ministry?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I kind of did it the other way around. I trained as a spiritual director and as a chaplain at the same time, which I might not recommend,
Oh, is
but
that right?
but it worked. Well, it's just a lot all at once.
Mm.
And it's two different ways of offering spiritual care. But anyway, so I actually was doing spiritual direction before I became a pastor. Wasn't really
Mm,
planning to become a pastor, but then once I was invited, it was a part-time pastorate. And so I did try to pull in spiritual formation and spiritual direction practices in there. I think spiritual direction is a really helpful thing for pastors to be trained in. I think I had some resources from that training and the chaplaincy training that a lot of pastors don't get if they go through a traditional seminary program. But I also think that there are some scenarios where it's hard to pull those things in
yeah.
on the ground. And because you're with spiritual direction, you're meeting with an individual or maybe a group, maybe once a month. You're not really doing life with them, but church, especially if it's a small church, which mine was, is different.
Hmm.
You interact with each other during the week. You run into each other in the grocery store. It's a different kind of
Yeah.
dynamic. So if I were, I think I would have to feel really undeniably assured somehow by God that I was supposed to go back into traditional pastoring. I really kind of, for a long time, because I was doing both things, I was doing the online spiritual formation and then the in-person church, and through COVID, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a while, I think at some point I was like, one of these is going to take precedence. And for a while, I thought it was going to be the church, and then I realized it really wasn't.
Hmm.
So,
Man, that's such a great way to describe the difference whether we are doing life together with someone or not. Like
mhm,
in my case right now, when people come to see me, I'm not doing life with them.
right.
Directees that are coming into my space, we're not doing life together. So, but then I'm also entering into a micro church context where I am becoming a little bit more familiar to the people. And so
Hmm.
we're beginning to do life together. And then that brought some interesting thoughts and obstacles, or I shouldn't say
Hmm.
obstacles, but challenges that I didn't think about before. I feel like there are two thoughts. Like someone like Eugene Peterson would say, the role of a pastor is to devote to prayer, scripture, and spiritual direction. He says that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then through my interviews with a few folks now, and I have come to realize some of them think that pastors are really busy running the church.
Hmm.
So for them, they don't have time to become spiritual directors. And some other things that I heard is that when you're preaching all the time, it's hard to go from preaching all the time to now listening mode. So
Hmm.
there is some
Hmm.
challenges with that. Where do you see spiritual direction fitting? Like, because one argument is that all pastors need to be spiritual directors, and the other side is that no, pastors got a lot to do. So there should be separate spiritual directors who can listen to
Hmm.
the congregation. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know if I know. I don't know if I know how to answer that question. I think pastor means shepherd, and so I wouldn't say my shepherding gifts have gone away since I stepped down from a pastor role. Those are some of my strongest gifts. But I mean, I'm a writer, so I can write a sermon, and I have teaching gifts, but I don't. I do feel like it's really hard to shift gears. I'm actually guest preaching this Sunday at a different
Mhm.
church, and I was trying to write a sermon for them yesterday, and I was like, oh my word, I have only been out of this for like not even 6 months, and I'm already, this is so hard because I think what you have to do with your brain and how you are tending to the people
Yeah.
is different. And so, I mean, I wish I could be Eugene Peterson. I think he was probably exceptional. And I think if you can provide some kind of spiritual direction as a pastor, great. But I had a hard time doing both of those things. I do think that it's good if pastors can incorporate some kind of spiritual formation, which I don't know that it's supposed to be something different than discipleship, but I think in our current, the way that Christianity has played out here, Protestant Christianity, at least in this nation for a while, is that they are actually kind of two different things.
Yeah.
Discipleship is more like info loading. And so you're learning, and you need that. That's like the scaffolding. So you're learning all the things, you're memorizing Bible verses, you're starting to get involved and like serve or whatever. And then formation is more now all of that stuff is supposed to become who you are. And so I do think there is a place for pastors to provide experiences for their congregation to make the stuff that they're learning in here filter down into here and come out here. So I think that's important, but I don't know if like spiritual direction sessions is super realistic for most pastors and churches.
And some spiritual directors have recognized the shepherding side coming out in session. And I think that's one thing I kind of enjoyed myself. But a good friend of mine who has become a spiritual director after being a church planting pastor for a while,
Mm.
he admitted to me, and then I agree with him, at least in my context, in my life as well, that when we became a spiritual director, it felt like we're doing more of a shepherding than when we were actually running the
Mhm.
church,
Yes.
because we're too busy running the church, thinking about the budgeting and programs
Mhm.
and setting
Mhm.
things up and Sunday to Sunday and preaching. That took a
Mhm.
lot out of us. So
Mhm.
even though I do want to be, I'm a big fan of Eugene Peterson myself, so I do wish I could be a pastor and spiritual director. But then there's a realistic challenge of like when you are running the church, it's really hard to do all of those.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
did you find that that's true for you when you're in a spirit direction session that more of your shepherding gift is emerging?
Yes, for sure. I absolutely feel that. And I also, last year, I started doing group spiritual direction too.
Mm,
And that's even more because I mean, it's a super tiny flock, but it's a group, it's a little
yeah.
flock. And so facilitating not only one person listening to God, but other people listening to God for each other and helping them interact well and that kind of thing. Actually, there was a last month's session with one of the groups. I wasn't able to be there. And so
Oh,
I deputized somebody in the group to facilitate. And I guess it went great and was super powerful. And I felt like this is the kind like shepherding for transformation is what I'm really interested
yeah.
in. And so it was exciting to see or hear about that happening. And I feel like that's harder. That can happen in a church, but it's harder to do it and it's harder to see it. Because a lot of times you're just kind of crisis managing in churches too.
That's
It's not
true.
just it's not just the budget, but like somebody's not getting along or somebody's mad at you or somebody thinks that, like there's just all this extra noise. Spiritual direction is a little quieter.
If you had to name one or two things spiritual direction tends to address better than, other
Mhm.
ministries or leadership roles, what would they be?
I don't know if this is what you're actually asking, but I feel like because a lot of people that I work with are deconstructing or have deconstructed, and they come out, this isn't always true, but most of them come out of an evangelical background. Evangelicalism tends to talk a lot about it's not a religion, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
And many of these people are saying to me, I feel super religious to me. I'm not sure about the relationship. Like, and I see it, right? So I think spiritual direction helps people realize that it actually can be a relationship. You can actually hear from God. Like God is actually there. God actually wants to communicate with you and
Yeah.
you can hear. To me that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I love that realization because I think I'm also running into that reality. People who come to me often are those who have deconstructed. And then I
Hmm.
think there is that doubt or questioning of like, do I actually really have relationship with God? Because
Hmm.
whenever I have questions or doubts, I want to wrestle with some of the questions. If I go to church, I can't bring those up because they
Yes, a
will
lot of people
criticize
say
me.
that.
Yeah, they will
Hmm.
criticize me for having those questions or
Hmm.
oh, that's so dangerous. Don't go down that path or they that's what
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
hear. But in spiritual direction, they can bring that. and then feel
Mhm.
very heard and accepted, and God is okay with those questions. They realize it in a session.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
have you have
Yeah.
seen a lot of that?
Oh, a lot. I think also there's a lot of, and maybe some churches are more intentional about this than others, but I think there's a lot of theology that says, and I want to clarify and say, I actually do believe in a version of original sin,
Hmm.
but I think a lot of the ways that gets taught and a lot of the theology that gets constructed around that phrase is that therefore I am inherently worthless. And somehow God loves me, but it's this weird kind of love that I don't really understand because I'm obviously not lovable. And so I feel like there's a whole lot of shame and guilt that is not commensurate to
Hmm.
what has actually gone on in that person's life, and certainly not to who they actually are. And so I think spiritual direction gives the opportunity to, without directly teaching, gives the opportunity to help people see that, of course, you're not perfect. Sin is a real thing, and your core is not your sin. Your core is that you're beloved of God. God made you in God's image, and being able to sit with somebody and help them get a better sense of who they are because of God, not in spite of, is another thing that I think spiritual direction is really good for. And I say that because I've seen directees of mine go from, and I mean medication and therapy also helps, but go from jobless, super depressed, not taking care of themselves to working in a professional job, like showing up looking real sharp, which fine, that's appearance, but I think it is reflective of something that actually goes on. Whereas in church, I would say that same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again on Sundays and sermons, and seeing those kinds of transformations was pretty rare.
When we observe the church today, some spiritual directors are within inside the church and some are outside. Some
Hmm.
churches already have a very good understanding of spiritual direction,
Hmm.
why it's needed.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
there's still a lot of churches, especially in Protestant circle, they still don't know what spiritual direction is. I still
Hmm.
come across where I say I'm a spiritual director and Protestant pastors are like, what is that? So, got a broad scope of people who understand what this is and who doesn't.
Hmm.
Where and how do we serve the church? What is the gap in church where people fall through the crack? And how can
Mm,
we come in to catch those folks or help the church be holistic? That's like a big question in some sense, because,
that's a big question.
yeah. So, do you see any pathway forward?
Honestly, that has been a big struggle for me, and I have not cracked that. I mean, even so, most of the people, most of what I do is online. I'm trying now that this is a full-time thing for me, I'm trying to get some aspects of it a little bit more embodied, but because it's online, a lot of people that I've met are not in my area. And almost as far as even directees or people that take my spiritual formation classes or whatever, most of them have never heard of spiritual direction either. So that's
Yeah.
one hurdle where you have to be like, okay, so spiritual director doesn't mean that I'm actually going to tell you what to do. Don't worry, I'm not a cult
Right.
leader. I'm not going to try to like be abusive to you. Like there's a lot of hesitancy even among individuals. And so then when you try to go to a church and say, "Hey, can I help?" A lot of the response that I've got has been, "Oh, either, oh, I can't, you think I can't do my job? Or are you
Mm,
telling me I'm doing this wrong?" Or,
right.
I mean, I get a lot of my circles because I grew up in a complementarian space. So a lot of my circles are not super friendly to women in spiritual leadership. And
Hmm.
so that's another piece that I run
Yeah.
into. So yeah, I don't have an answer to that question. I have not cracked that, but it's something that I'm really trying to work on because I think it's important. I do think I don't want to take over for anybody. I really
Yeah.
don't want to be a traditional pastor again. But I also I have been a pastor, and so I know pastors get beat up too.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just pastors being abusive to congregants. Sometimes it goes the other way. And
That's
so
right.
I really want to be a support to pastors, but I haven't figured out how to communicate that to them in a way that they can receive yet.
Yeah. I was ordained in Evangelical Covenant Church,
Oh
ECC,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
in that denomination, spiritual direction is somewhat well known. So it's interesting to see in Covenant Circle, a lot of spiritual directors are utilized by pastors, whereas I'm kind of more outside the church context too, and more with the micro church context. So like folks
Hmm.
that I've been meeting in my context, the spiritual directors, their directees are not pastors. So it's like it's
Right.
people who are leaving the church. So it's so interesting to
Hmm.
see some spiritual directors are serving the leaders and pastors, and some spiritual directors are just serving the people who are leaving the church and new generation and deconstructed
Hmm.
folks. So it just seems weird that we got two vastly different areas. And either you're serving in this context or in that. So, but it sounds like you're more in the outside the church context. Is that?
Yeah, I am. And I am, my personality is kind of to be a bridge. I really thrive in, I mean, I am challenged by this, but I really thrive in diverse settings, whatever the metrics are, or
Mm,
whatever the difference is. So, for example, I mean, this was in some ways this was brutally difficult, but in 2020, it became clear, which I'd only been a pastor for a year at that point. It became clear that my in-person, except not really in person because it was 2020, congregation was extremely more conservative theologically and politically than my online context. And I didn't fit in either of the boxes. And so figuring out how to shepherd both of those groups well was hard,
mm,
but also kind of invigorating for me. And so I kind of feel like it's the same challenge to try to shepherd people who are leaving the church and people who are trying to maintain the church. So I really would love to bridge those two groups.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah. So one thing that I really love about spiritual directors is that because they are listeners, I feel like they have very unique insights from their observation and listening. From that perspective, like, is there any unique insight that you have that you gained about the church? Especially when we're thinking about the future and the new era that we're entering into. What do you see as the biggest challenge from your perspective from listening? What is the biggest challenge the church is facing? Yeah, moving forward.
I don't know if this is the biggest challenge. This is the thing that I feel invited to wrestle with myself this year. And because of what I do, I usually just take people along for the ride when I'm wrestling with stuff. So, in July, when I was getting ready to step down from my church and take the pilgrimage online full time, I had a little online celebration anniversary slash relaunch party things. And I was talking a little bit about my hopes for my D Min. And somebody afterwards, who is a former client, said, I really feel like what needs to happen is the church needs to become more trauma informed. And I thought about it and I was like, I think there's something to that, but I don't feel like that's the whole thing. And since then, I've seen a lot of other organizations, ministries, individuals who are actually therapists and are more officially trauma informed than I am. My information just comes from working with traumatized people at this point. And so I feel like I don't need to move into their space. There are people who are already doing that work that's good. But there's something about, for those of us who call ourselves Christians and have a savior who died in some way that accomplishes forgiveness, like reconciliation between us and God, there's something about forgiveness that
Mm,
I think really needs to be wrestled with because I don't want to tell any traumatized person that they have to forgive, but I also don't feel like they will fully heal if they can't get to that place.
yeah.
And I also think that churches need to there's something this year for me to examine about forgiveness and repentance because churches also need to repent, I think.
Hmm, hmm.
I don't know how to accomplish that either, especially because I can't even explain to them what a spiritual director is. I haven't figured out who's going to have those conversations with me, but I really think it's important. And part of why is because there are a lot of, I've moved around a lot in my life. I've done a lot of different things. And in different ways, all of the pieces of my history are coming full circle right now,
Mm,
including the church that I had an extremely bad ending with a number of years ago. They are the ones that I'm preaching at this weekend. And I feel like we have a complicated history, but I don't feel any kind of resentment or bitterness or need to be vindictive or anything like that. And so I feel like there's something in this one opportunity that is reflective of a lot of what I'm going to be working on in the next year or couple of years, as far as what does it actually mean to forgive before we get to reconciliation. Like, I don't, they're not the same thing.
mm,
And so trauma information is helpful, necessary, but I'm not sure it goes far enough. And so how does
yeah.
forgiveness work? Where does it fit here?
Just like people are not too familiar with spiritual direction, a lot more spiritual directors are trauma informed. What
Mhm.
does that actually mean? How is it different from, I guess, people who are not trauma informed? What's the difference?
So I don't know what people mean when they say that. I think that there are some actual programs that train you, that inform you about trauma and how to be with people who are traumatized. I don't have that, and so I won't necessarily call myself trauma informed, although I think I am,
Mm-hmm.
just by experience. One thing I think it means is that the words trauma informed are not triggering to you. When my former client said, churches need to be trauma informed, I thought about it and I was like, if I went to the church I grew up in, which I love that church, I went there a couple Sundays ago, just to see people, and said, I would like to give you some training on how to be trauma informed.
Mm,
They would, maybe I'm wrong, because I haven't been embedded in that community in a while, but I feel like they would be like, "What is wrong with Jen? She's so like, what happened to her? What is this?" I feel like that label is actually triggering for people who probably don't like the word triggering either.
mm,
So trauma informed, you're not triggered by that by that term. I think it means that you're able to be aware of the types of things that might trigger somebody, that
yeah,
might give them some kind of, that might cause them to shut down,
yeah.
that might cause them to not come back. I can't speak for what other people mean when they say that, because I actually went to a seminar by another spiritual director who I don't know personally, that was styled as trauma informed, and I went there and this person said something and I was like, I mean, it didn't trigger me, but I thought, oh my word, if my
Mm,
people heard that, they would be like, okay, goodbye, I'm leaving this Zoom call. So it's a little bit of it's one of those labels that I feel like could mean so many things, that also for that reason I don't use it. But I do think, just a basic awareness that, there are people in
mm-hmm.
here who have experiences that I probably not had. I have my
Yeah.
own trauma, but I probably haven't had theirs. So when I teach some classes, some spiritual formation classes, and at the beginning session of every class, I always say, listen, your story is your story. People in here have different trauma, and sometimes each other's trauma will trigger somebody else's. Or
Yeah.
so you need to be able to say what you need to say in this class, but you also need to be able to be safe. So if someone starts talking about something that they need to talk about and you can't sit in it, you have permission to leave. I'll text you when we're done talking about that thing or whatever. I think that is, at minimum, is an example of trauma informed. You
Yeah.
have to be able to care for everybody.
Right.
Everybody's in a different place.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I personally have a difficult time with that training.
right.
So I think people who are not too familiar with trauma, they need to be trained. So I get that. But
Mhm.
those of us who have been through trauma, we don't need that training. We
Yeah, right.
know. So when we see those of us who are very aware of the trauma that has taken place in our lives, in other people's lives, we can kind of see in session, like when a certain word is
Mhm.
said and then all of a sudden they shut down, and we can notice
Mhm.
that, we can see
Yes,
that.
that's right.
And then and then when we notice that, we can't go forward. Like those of
Right.
us, I think this is kind of probably what they mean by trauma informed.
Hmm.
Those of us who understand trauma, notice that moment and we have to pause or go
Hmm.
back or slow
Hmm.
things down and ask different questions to what's
Hmm.
happening right now in your body, like things like that. Some of us are called into this because we are survivors or healed from those traumas. So
Hmm.
yeah, sometimes I don't know, like, okay, I think it's needed for those who have not been through trauma, but
Or who haven't tapped into their trauma, maybe.
yeah,
I
maybe. Yeah,
mean,
that's right.
I I feel like in some ways I feel like, oh, I've had a pretty sheltered life. And then in other ways, maybe it depends on the day. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I've actually been through a lot. Um,
That's true.
I feel like my experience growing up in an evangelical church was pretty mild compared to what I encounter from a lot of people, but I also have done my own wrestling with God, and so I think that helps. But there were a couple of things that happened to me as a pastor where I had an actual trauma response, and it was after that. So it's not even been that long ago, but it was after that that I was like, "Oh, now, when someone says they were activated or they had a trauma response, I know what that
Mm,
is because I know that's what that was that I just had."
mm,
So I think even just, it's not even as spiritual directors who are, however, we are trauma informed, we're not going to get it right all the time. But I
yeah.
think being willing to be open and notice things in ourselves and what we're seeing in our directees helps to further inform us.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
This is kind of like what I really want to focus on. Sorry to kind of leave this toward the end. But I'm really, really focused on, like, I really want to reimagine what spiritual formation needs to look like. And
Mm,
again, I feel like spiritual directors, because of their insight and unique role that they serve, I think they have a lot to say about how to reimagine what spiritual formation has to be for the future church and
mhm.
its health and her health. How would you do it? How would you tackle spiritual formation for the future so that churches can be healthier and holistic?
I mean, I think a greater awareness of an ability to engage contemplative practices, because I think the practices themselves are not salvific, but I do think that
Mm,
they enable us to perceive anything in different ways, but perceive the Holy Spirit specifically in ways that can transform us. But one thing that I still haven't managed to convince any church team to take me up on, but I teach a class on stages of faith.
yeah.
And the first time I encountered that concept, I thought, what is this? But that's because I was in an early stage of faith, I think. I think, especially for pastors and leaders in ministry, to have an understanding that their people we're all on this walk together with Jesus, but from another perspective, we're all in different spots on it. And so the person that looks like they're losing their faith maybe is losing their faith, or maybe they're just in a different stage. Or Teresa of Avila talks about a castle with mansions in
Hmm.
it, and maybe they're in a different mansion. It looks different. And I feel like if pastors, other ministry leaders had a conception of that, a real, like, could really dig into that, it would be so helpful as they try to provide spiritual formation activities for different people in their congregations. Give them a greater insight as to what, when I meet with this one person, probably they're approximately here. And so this is the thing that's going to help them not get stuck, not go backwards, but keep moving with Jesus.
Mm.
Um, I feel like that would, and it has been helpful too. I do teach that class, it's just not to the teams that I want to. um, but I teach it to people who have deconstructed, and that's been very helpful for them too, to be like,
Mm.
oh, okay, that's why this type of faith expression is so uncomfortable to me.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
maybe sometimes it's because it's really unhealthy, but maybe it's not unhealthy. Maybe I'm just growing, and so it doesn't fit me right now. And that has been extremely enlightening to people who are coming out of church or trying to get back into a church.
What are those? If you could give us quick outline of those stages, of faith, what would they be?
So, I mean, there are lots of different models, and we look at Teresa of Avila's interior castle mostly, and she
Hmm.
didn't call it that. But I guess what is helpful to me about her model is the idea that Jesus is already in your soul. So the evangelical idea is that we ask Jesus into our hearts, but her idea and others I've read since then is that Jesus is already there. We have
Hmm.
to enter our own souls to get to him.
Hmm.
And so the first stage is you're kind of entering, you're just kind of figuring things out.
Hmm.
And as you enter further and further into the castle that is your soul, Jesus is in all of the rooms, but he's kind of hanging out in the middle.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where it's the third mansion, and it's also, I think it's the third stage in Fowler's stages of faith, where you get super busy. You're
Yeah.
learning a lot. You're really feeling connected to your community. You're serving. You're leading Bible studies. You're doing all of these things. And that's a really great stage, but that is often where churches stop. And it's a great place for churches to stop because those are the people that get stuff done.
Mm. I see. Hmm.
But some people start to get uncomfortable with that or bored with it
Yeah.
or disillusioned with it. And they might be moving into a more quiet room or mansion or stage where they're kind of reforming. It's almost like a cocoon. I feel like this doesn't happen for Teresa, but I feel like that's often where people's dark nights of the soul happen, where they're like, I can't
Mm.
connect with God anymore. Is like, maybe I'm not even really a Christian. Maybe this stuff is fake. But I want to, but whatever. And then beyond that, it's almost like a mirroring of the first few stages. So I would say I could make not identical theological assertions that I would have made in an earlier stage, but pretty similar ones. But what I mean when I say them now is way different from what I meant
Mm.
when
Yeah.
I said them back when I was 30 or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
So it sounds like that's the book that you wrote about, right? Like the
yes,
follower, how getting close to Jesus brings you to
to
yourself. So
yourself.
that's where that idea came from. I get it. Can you tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about your book?
Yes. So, when I became a pastor, I preached a couple sermon series. It's easier for me to preach in series because, as you can tell, I talk a lot. I have a lot of
Mm.
words. So I can't wrap up an idea in one sermon. My third sermon series, I was like, I think I want to do something narrative. I want to focus on an individual in the Bible, and I couldn't figure out who I wanted to talk about. And then I was like, well, Peter has a lot of information, a lot of stories, so we can talk about him. So I started writing this series about him. And as I was writing it, I already had this. I actually think I was already teaching my Stages of Faith class. And so I was like, oh, I think this fits that model.
Mm.
And so then, a number of years after I had written and preached that sermon series, I thought, I think I can make this into a book.
Mm. So
So
that's why
I
you
did. And
use the story of Peter as a
mhm.
story. Okay.
Yeah, Peter's kind of the illustration of what it looks like to follow Jesus over the long haul and the ways that you grow, the ways that you change, the challenges you can have, and ultimately, the ways that you become more like Jesus. But then, because we are made in God's image to follow Jesus, we become more like ourselves, the selves that God intended us to be in the first place.
Awesome. Yeah, everybody check it out. I think you can get that on Amazon or other
Mhm.
places called Follower, How Getting Close to Jesus Brings You to Yourself by Jennifer Layte. So, final question. If people are inspired by this episode and listening to you, or even want to sign up for your course that you
Mm.
teach or receive spiritual direction from you, how do they find you? Where do they need to go to find your
So
information?
the quickest is probably to go to the ministry website that I have, which is the-pilgrimage.org. But you can also email me, Jenn, at the-pilgrimage.org. And yeah, I love to hear from people. It's super great. And I'm getting ready to sign up more people for my classes. So I teach two of them.
Yeah.
There's the Stages of Faith class that I mentioned, and then there's also life mapping class that I teach. So,
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I love the insight that I gained from you, and I would love to have more conversations in the future if
yeah,
you would be
totally.
open
Let's
to
do
it.
it.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah,
good.
sounds great.
All right.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much. Yeah.